is Sean Weiss, and as always, I want to start off by thanking each and every single one of you for taking time out of what I know is an extremely busy day to tune in and listen to what it is that I and my very special guest on each show have to say with respect to healthcare regulatory compliance, auditing, coding, billing, compliance, and operations. Today, I am extremely excited about the guest that I have on my show today. I would say for those of you that don't know her, but I don't think there's anybody that doesn't know Sonal Patel. Sonal is a healthcare coding advisor. She's an auditor. She's a compliance consultant. She's an author. She's an educator. She's a speaker. She also hosts her own podcast, and she's the creator and host of the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series, which focuses on audits, compliance, healthcare, medical coding, and medical billing. I always get an opportunity to listen to Sonal's podcasts because she's such a consummate professional, and she always has really timely, authoritative, and much needed information for healthcare professionals that's being discussed on each and every single one of her podcasts. And for me to be able to have Sonal on my podcast is truly a privilege for me. A little bit more about Sonal. She is also a published author, as I said just a moment ago, and most recently, she was a contributor to actually two of the chapters in the most recent release from HCCA's Healthcare Compliance Manual. Again, Sonal also has her own blog. She does the Friday Focus, and as I said, she does the Paint the Medical Picture podcast as well as news flashes, and she publishes a lot of articles. Sonal also holds the Certified Professional Medical Auditor. She's also a Certified Professional Coder and a Certified Medical Coder. But what I found to be extremely interesting about Sonal's educational background is that she holds a bachelor's in art history with a minor in business from Hiram College. But even more interesting is that Sonal holds a Master of Arts and an ABD in South Asian art history from the Ohio State University. And as I've talked about on prior podcasts with other guests, especially like Kenneth Hertz, who we released his podcast just not too long ago. Kenny migrated into healthcare from the arts and entertainment world. He used to be a symphony conductor. He was an arts and education music teacher. And if you've not listened to that podcast, really a fascinating guy who's been in healthcare for 3 decades, tremendous operational background, knowledge of really how leadership is supposed to work in a healthcare organization. But enough about Kenny Hertz. This show is all about Sonal Patel. And Sonal, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I hope that my introduction has done you some justice, but I'd also like for you to talk a little bit about the things that I didn't brag about.
Amazing, Sean. Thank you so much for that ridiculously amazing. I'm humbled with that intro, so thank you so much. Yeah, I do. You bring up a really good point in my history. My past is definitely in the arts world. So the transition into the sciences, was definitely a big thing for me. Of course, I took the basic science classes in high school and college level. But, I really wanted to shift my career and do it very, very well. So I really took a very long time doing my coursework. It took me about a year to complete it way back in the day. And so I really wanted to transition and do it very, very well. So yeah, but I definitely do think I bring the writing skills, the analytical and critical thinking skills that I retain from all of my college and graduate level work, which I do believe definitely can apply to the type of compliance and consulting work that I do today. So yeah, I think it's a really good fit. Like I haven't thrown away any of that past career, I think I can bring a lot of it into the work that I do today.
Yeah, yeah, and and I think you raise a great point, right? Because in the kind of work that you do, the kind of work that I do, research, writing,
Mhm.
verbal communication, these are the skills that are invaluable in our industry.
Yes.
Um, and you know, I know for me, I spend probably somewhere between 20 to 30 hours a week reading, deciphering really exciting things like the Federal Register
It excites us. Yes.
and CMS releases and things of that nature. But I think, and I like to talk about this a lot on all of my podcasts because I think it's so relevant. Every single day, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of people transitioning into healthcare, whether it's operations, whether
Mhm.
it's compliance, coding, billing. And a lot of these folks, if not the majority of these folks, transitioned from an industry obviously outside of the life sciences. And, I think they come into it maybe with this expectation of, I'm going to make a lot of money because, it's healthcare and it's one of the constants like death and taxes, right? Everybody's going to get sick. Everybody's going to need to see a doctor. And there's always going to be a need for professionals on the operations side. But I think, you know, one of the things that to me becomes a misperception is certifications. And yourself and people like Tony L. Holmes and Terry Fletchers and Shannon DeCondas and I the list goes on and on and on. You all have alphabet soups
Mhm.
after your names, right?
Yes.
And 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 I think it's tremendous because it shows your dedication to learning,
Mhm.
education, the continuance of mastering your craft. But I think for me, one of the misperceptions, and I want to know whether you agree or disagree on this. I think one of the misperceptions that a lot of people have coming into our industry, they think, well, I'm going to take this self study course or I'm going to take this boot camp, and in 6 months, I'm going to, you know, sit for the CPC or the CMC or the CPMA or whatever it is, and I'm going to get my certification and I'm going to be ready to go. What advice can you give to individuals who are coming into the industry thinking that all they need is a certification?
That's a terrific question. And I give this type of advice often. I literally just spoke to a nurse last week. Now, she is a nurse. She has been an experienced RN for 3 decades and is going through a transition, as we all do in our careers, in our paths, right? So, when you give advice to a professional in the life sciences who has a background in hands-on patient care, you can give advice to them in a different fashion, right? They definitely don't need to do the anatomy classes, the pathophysiology classes. They have all of that education already, but you definitely have to dedicate yourself to understanding the coding and billing materials and the auditing and compliance materials. Many people do perform swimmingly on exams and tests, and they can knock out it's like 5 hours and 40 minutes for that exam. It's strenuous. It takes a lot out of you. So kudos to you if you can pass it on the first attempt. Great job. But in the day to day work that we perform, it's not as easy as just, multiple choice answers like it is on that test. You actually have to know what you're doing. You actually have to know all of the educational material behind all of those codes when you're reading those operative reports or that E&M SOAP note, whatever. You have to understand the deeper level of thinking that's involved before you can abstract and place those codes on claims if that's the type of work you're planning on doing. So it's integral that you understand and master material. Sure, you can take a course for 6 months, fine. Um, but you really have to keep up with that education. You have to get those CEUs year after year, depending on how many organizations you test with. So I myself took my 1 year course through a program that was AHIMA backed, but I don't hold an AHIMA certification. Instead, I chose a different path and I sat through the AAPC. So all of the credentials I hold are from them. So it's a matter of, you have to maintain every single CEU from year to year to display to your employers, to your physicians, to your PAs, whoever, that you know what you're doing and that you have integrity in the work that you perform on their behalf.
And that comes from a continuous level of research, learning, and putting yourself out there to master your craft. One of the other things before we get into our main topic of discussion for today's podcast, um, listservs.
Get on
um,
them. Mhm.
get on them, but I also say get on them with the caveat of be careful not to just take something that somebody posts because it sounds really good and think that that's authoritative or that is the only answer, because healthcare, everything that we do is done in various shades of gray, right? There are not a lot of definitives when it comes to payer coverage determinations, whether
Mhm.
it's on the private payer side or on the government side, right? And I think
Right.
that's for good cause. And we're going to talk about that in our main topic today. But listservs are fantastic. There's a lot of really outstanding people out there who have a tremendous amount of knowledge, who post some really great stuff. But you need to be able to take that information that you're gleaning from those individuals and expound upon that by
Mhm.
doing your own research, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Good. All right. So, um, enough about the certifications and education and that stuff. I think today I'm really excited because the topic today is something that I have pushed out many times through my blogs. I've talked about it on different podcasts. On the other show that I do with Eric Rubenstein and Jordan Johnson, Coffee Compliance and Chuckleheads, um, we just had attorney Matt Lawhon on the show as a special guest, and we talked about the UPICs and we talked about the Mufuku programs, but we talked about it from a legal perspective.
Mhm.
With you, I want to talk about it from an auditing perspective. I want to talk about it from a consultant's, a healthcare professional's perspective, like yours, and I want to talk about it really from prior to a letter being received. What should people in the medical practices, physicians, non-physician practitioners, auditors, coders, billers, compliance professionals, operation people, what do they need to be aware of? What should they be doing prior to a letter ever arriving? And then I want to talk about some of the aggressiveness that we have seen come out from the UPICs, especially right before the pandemic, right? Because
Yes.
the pandemic put everybody on hold.
Mhm.
But prior to that, we saw some really aggressive language being sent out in the form of these what I call warning shots fired over the bow
I
of
agree.
the practices. And
Mhm.
then I want to talk about some of the interesting statistics, and I want to really talk about what it is. So, very quickly, because we do have so many new people coming into the industry and so many people who are transitioning either from billing and coding into auditing or auditing into regulatory compliance, let's make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about when we say a UPIC. A UPIC is a Unified Program Integrity Contractor. And as CMS has noted in their program integrity manual, The primary goal of the UPIC is to identify cases of suspected fraud, waste, and abuse and develop them thoroughly and in a timely manner and take immediate action to ensure that Medicare trust fund monies are not inappropriately paid. So that's just a down and dirty explanation of the UPICs. Let's take it from there and let's kind of expound upon that and let's talk about your experience dealing with the UPICs.
Okay, well, I literally just gave my month end fraud, waste, and abuse podcast last month, where I really wanted to put a focus on specific cases that were resolved with the UPIC. And these cases were all similar in the fact that they were dealing with this new device, for electroacupuncture. And, I, as a consultant, have been privy and have experience with numerous cases, well before my podcast last month. And so the fact that when I am privileged enough to receive records and claims, and I have to analyze the data, I'm looking and I'm seeing that this does not look good, right? This doesn't match. This is not compliant. So, when I try and develop reports and findings and things like that, when you perform your deep dive, you have to try and be able to explain to practices and providers that this type of device and service is not payable, based on the particular device and its usage, but the way they were told once upon a time by whoever of how to code it, how to bill it, those codes are actually reimbursable. They are payable, absolutely, but not for the actual service that they were providing, which was electroacupuncture, which is a much more topical thing that you put behind your ear with tape, and that's about it. There's no surgery involved.
Right.
And so I really had a lot of experience in types of cases like that all seem to come to an end last month, when the DOJ had put those reports out that I always talk about on my podcast. And so I really do like to advise folks that, you have to do your due diligence when you're trying to perform new services, new service lines, and things like that. You shouldn't just trust these companies that come around your block and try and tell you how to bill and code, specifically when they don't retain any certified coders or trusted compliance consultants on their payroll. They just don't have people like that. They're simply plucking these reimbursable payable codes that are often much higher in reimbursement because they come from the surgical section in this particular case, in the CPT code book in the 60,000 code range. So that's high money. That's high dollar value.
And I think you raise a really great point, right? And this is something that we've talked about on previous podcasts with other guests as well. The purpose of a device manufacturer is to make money,
Right.
plain and simple. The fact that the majority of the information that I see come across my desk from clients who I engage with across the country, the majority of it is information coming from the American Medical Association. It may be information coming from a specialty society, but some of the information that I've seen come out has been a little bit dated. And what I don't see a lot of times coming from these device manufacturer reps is actual local coverage determinations, or national coverage determinations. And I always try to, look, the fact of the matter is, the '80s Mercedes, as I've referred to it for so long, they're gone. Providers are forced to sometimes see a higher volume of patients than what they normally would want to see because the reimbursements either remain stagnant from year to year or they're declining. Again, the proposed 2020 conversion factor takes a dip of about $1, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
Some specialties are facing potential, 3% up to 7% losses. Now, of course, we know what happens right before it gets implemented. They give us a stay of execution, so to speak, from CMS, from the government. Um, but my point here, and I'm sorry for being long-winded. My point here is that we don't submit claims to specialty societies for reimbursement. We don't submit claims to the American Medical Association for reimbursement. We submit claims for reimbursement to the insurance companies. So when you're trying to add an ancillary service into your mix, irrespective of what your specialty is, don't just take the information provided to you by a sales representative. You've got to use your words, you've got to do your due diligence and you've got to dive deep. I can't tell you right now how many UPIC cases I have of providers over the last 12 months, 15 months, 18 months who implemented a new service line into their practice without thoroughly investigating it. And now they're finding out the hard way because they're getting hit for demands that they got to pay all this money back. And they're like, but wait a minute, here's what the manufacturer gave us. Here's what the distributor gave us. That's right. But did you check with CMS? Did you check with the commercial payers to figure out whether it was investigational and experimental? There's a difference between FDA approved and FDA cleared.
Well said. I mean, it's absolutely true. There are so many practices. It makes me sad. There's so many practices that don't go those extra steps. They just trust that pamphlet, those, few pieces of paper that may be stapled together, and they just trust that and they go with it. They don't seek legal counsel even. They just take the marketing companies at their word, and bill with it for years and then are in shock when they have to pay all this money back 5, 6 years later. So yeah, that's basically what I go in, and I enjoy doing that. I enjoy trying to help and trying to make providers take these corrective actions, implement compliance programs. Sadly, it's after the fact, but it's better than them just closing shop. So yeah.
So, talking a little bit more about the UPIC programs, and I think it's important for folks to understand that the UPICs didn't just poof appear, right?
Right.
The UPIC process was really a consolidation that the Medicare and Medicaid program integrity functions put into place. And what they did was they took the zone program integrity contractors and they took the program safeguard contractors and they sort of brought them all into this single contractor. And the purpose of this was to obviously combat and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, either in the Medicare program or the Medicaid program. And as I said, the whole purpose was, for the UPIC program to merge these separate contracting functions into a single contractor and then to break it down into a geographic area with specific responsibilities to conduct program integrity audits and investigation, and to work across the Medicare and Medicaid operations. So, you hear a lot about the Mafuku programs, being part of this, the mixed Medicaid integrity contractors. But I want to talk a little bit about the aggressive language. And I know that you spent some time pulling
Love it.
a document,
Mhm.
and some of that language. So let me zip my trap for a few minutes and let you take it away and talk a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah. So, I had dug deeper in my file from last year, and I had posted something on LinkedIn, and you and I were going back and forth. And this was a while ago, so I had to really search for it. But yeah, so we had come across this new UPIC from the Western jurisdiction. This was back in August of 2020. And I just want to read a quote because I do think this is aggressive and very different than what I had read in the past from the UPIC. So it states, quote, "We will continue to monitor your Medicare claim submission patterns. Should your billing patterns remain aberrant, the following actions may be taken: exclusion from the Medicare program under 42 USC section 1320A through 7, imposition of civil monetary penalties pursuant to 42 USC sections 320A through 7A, and or the withholding of future payments as authorized by 42 CFR sections 405.371." So, that's huge. That's an end quote there. So that's huge, in my opinion, that they're saying that they can refer you to the DOJ, right? And exclusions, right? These, in my mind, it's extreme measures in what I thought used to be, or the way they used to couch it as just an overpayment education letter, right? That's how they kind of calm the providers down that, oh, this is just going to be for educational purposes. But then the
Yeah.
threat comes at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. So you're talking about the Western region, and that
Western
contractor is Clarent
Clarent.
Integrity Solutions. So for those of you that are listening, this UPIC is responsible for the states of Alaska, Arizona, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Minnesota, Nevada, North Dakota, Oregon, South Dakota, Utah, Washington State, Wyoming, American Samoa, Northern Marianas Island, and Guam. So we're not just talking about a small number of states or
Mhm.
territories, but
Mhm.
keep in mind they are also they are also the UPIC responsible for the southwestern jurisdiction as well, which includes Colorado, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, um, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So I can guarantee you, if the language was put into a document such as the one that you were just talking about for the Western region, there is absolutely no doubt that they are taking the same aggressive approach to threatening revocation and exclusion from a federal payer program across the country.
Mhm.
So, um, you know, it's hard enough on providers, right, Sonal, that they have
Right.
to
Right.
learn all of the clinical changes that take place in their specialties. They're dealing with operational issues, how to keep their doors open, especially just coming out of the public health emergency. And it sort of looks like we're kind of maybe going back into another problem. I don't know if you were looking at the numbers on COVID the other day, but California is now um, looking to reinstitute the mask mandate.
Right.
The state of Florida had 13,000, almost 13,000 new cases 2 days ago with 35 deaths. I think we're starting to see that Delta variant,
The
and
Delta variant. Right.
yeah, and
Sweeping. Mhm.
yeah, and it's concerning, right? Because uh, I'm seeing people who have actually been vaccinated, not only with Moderna, but they were vaccinated with Pfizer. Some were vaccinated with Johnson and Johnson, and they're actually now being diagnosed with COVID again.
Again.
just last night. So I'm a huge baseball guy, right? That's my vice. The Boston Red Sox.
Nice.
But last night they were supposed to be playing the New York Yankees, and they had to cancel the game because 5 members of the New York Yankees are now under COVID protocol, and 3 of these individuals were at the All-Star game in Colorado, and they were in close proximity and contact with all of the players in the dugout and fans during the lead up to the All-Star game and the home run derby. So, I mean, this is a nightmare.
This is a nightmare. A never-ending nightmare.
Yeah.
When is it going to end? Ugh.
Well, it ends when people stop politicizing it and they do what's right for humanity as opposed to what's right for one political party over another. And that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to get into the politics of things. Politics. It's just not worth it. So, obviously, Sonal, you've been involved in a number of UPIC cases. Can you talk a little bit about the process that you go through in helping to defend and put arguments together on behalf of your clients to help refute some of the negative findings that come from these UPIC audits?
So, right. So it's very similar. It's very similar to any other type of investigative or auditing type of work that I'm required to do. So my job, I consider myself to be, a big fan of physicians and practices. So I always have my, rosy colored lights on. I'm always trying to help. Okay. Always. That's my big thing. I always try and provide, line by line analyses of how I can defend, how I can help, the strategy to help them. So, yeah. So even when it comes to more of the ominous types of cases, absolutely. You try to mitigate, you try and diminish some of that negativity, try and pull out what the doctors and the documentation are saying that are actually defending certain services that are being billed out. So I always have to highlight that and point that out. And then what the attorneys and people do with that material, that's up to them. But that is my number one job, is to provide my analyses in the best light possible to help providers.
Excellent. And a couple of small points, right? And I know you're well aware of this. The UPICs, they love to send in their letters that you have to respond with the submission of your documents within 15 days.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, of receiving the letter. And for me, this is something that's really frustrating, right? Because under 42 CFR, and it's actually section 420.304B1, it specifically states, and I'm trying to go from memory here the best that I can, a CMS contractor is supposed to provide the healthcare provider 30 days to submit the documents being requested. And keep in mind, they do this, to hope that the uninitiated are going to, knee jerk react and pull a bunch of information that may or may not be relevant to the investigation to help them maybe dig further than just their probe, right?
So, I completely agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, one of the most important things that I think you and I probably make as a recommendation to our clients when they get that letter from a UPIC is, first, let's get legal counsel involved, right?
Right.
Because we want to
absolutely
preserve the privilege. We want to protect the work product doctrine.
Yes.
And I know you work with a lot of great lawyers. You've worked with Jenna Godleski.
Yes.
I know you guys are super close.
Yes.
I absolutely adore Jenna. I was privileged enough to have her on a previous podcast, and obviously she had nothing but tremendous things to say about you. But second, excuse me, the second most important thing that you can do is to request an extension.
Yes.
And,
Absolutely.
and especially because these are post payment reviews, they will grant you an extension. And I don't know if you saw this the other day, but there is a proposal as part of the Medicare physician fee schedule for 2022 that they are now going to require that contractors grant extensions for pre-payment audits, which has not been the case up until
Nope.
now.
Nope. I love it. No, you're absolutely right. And that is something that is an excellent point. Um, we don't like when providers take this into their own hands. Number one, like you had stated, it's knee jerk. It's way too fast. They're just giving them just a dump of things that aren't even being requested, right? So they're missing some of the more important pieces of documentation and data that is necessary. So you're absolutely right. When you obtain experienced healthcare attorneys, experienced healthcare consultants, we know what to do. We know what to look for. We know what the deeper meaning is behind those UPIC requests that come out. We know what types of information is a must, is mandatory. And absolutely, I know I myself have asked the attorneys for extensions. Can you please
Yeah,
get an extension for this? And
right.
they can, obviously obtain one. Um, yeah, because in so many cases, again, from experience, people in the providers' offices, their staff, or whoever are scared when they receive that envelope in the mail. And so, unfortunately, that piece of mail gets put in a drawer or in a handbag or whatever, and it's not opened timely. And then, therefore, on the back end, we're scrambling because it's already past their 15-day window
That's right.
before we receive it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the key point that you're making there, if I could be so bold to say that, and I never like to speak for any of our guests, but I think the key point that you're trying to make there is when that letter lands on somebody's desk, it needs to find its way to the practice administrator, to the compliance officer of the organization, and you've got to take immediate action. You can't sit on these things. That's the one thing that frustrates me. I've actually had a number of clients reach out to me after the due date, and they're like, "Can you help?" Well,
Well,
I'll do my best.
right.
Now, it's also important, I think, to help our listeners for this podcast today to understand that it's important to know what types of documents are being requested by a UPIC contractor, right? And I think you have to understand first, is the UPIC only seeking administrative and claims related medical records, or is the contractor also seeking documentation related to a provider's business relationships and or business practices? Because remember, the purpose of a UPIC is to ferret out fraud, waste, and abuse. So they're going to look at, you know, anti-beneficiary inducements. They're going to be looking at anti-kickbacks. They're going to be looking at potential Stark violations. So understanding what the UPIC is asking for is critical, right?
Correct. Absolutely. And the letters will be written that way. I mean, all of that information that they're seeking is going to be outlined for you in their very complicated language. It's not always just give me claims, give me documentation, give
That's
me your
right.
financials. It's never that simple. And so that's why it's always important to seek good legal guidance. You
Yeah.
have your attorney on speed dial in cases like this.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important, right? Because as with other program integrity audits, most reviews, what they like to refer to as claims reopenings by UPICs are actually generated as a result of data mining,
Right.
right?
Right.
I mean, look, some of these could be phone calls that they received from a Medicare beneficiary or from a disgruntled ex-employee saying, "Hey,
Mhm.
I know they're doing something wrong." But is it fair to say that the majority of these are done simply based on data mining?
Yes. In my opinion, yes.
Yep. Yeah. And when things, and this is the other important thing, when these UPIC cases are opened, um, that are tied to data mining. The UPIC will often restrict its review efforts, at least initially, to the claims being assessed, along with relevant associated medical coding, billing records, and related materials. Right. So be cognizant of what is going on. And I think the last thing, Sanal, I'd love to get your opinion on. Um, you know, there are different types of audits with the UPICs, obviously, right? But most of them are really probe samples.
Mhm.
And that's the reason why they're only asking for a limited number of claims, typically 10 claims.
Right. Exactly.
And can you talk a little bit about the purpose of a probe?
So, when the MAC identifies through their data mining certain discrepancies, the volume of mistakes, the volume of types of services that are being sent out, they want to see, in that probe sample, what exactly is going on. They want that documentation to be able to support those claims because, as we know, what the payer receives immediately for the past how many years, right? It's never, um, cl- uh, claims are never sent along with documentation, right? So all they're seeing is the volume of services on the HICFA, on the CMS 1500 claim form. That's it. So from, a data mining standpoint, I can definitely see and agree that, okay, all of these services, the sheer volume doesn't look very good, right? To Dr. Smith, for example. So they want to look a little bit deeper and ask for that documentation to see, are these services actually being supported?
Right. Good. So, look, folks, I think it's so important that, you don't just listen to what it is that Sanal and I are talking about, but that you actually are hearing. And I know those of you who are listening, it's because you're consummate professionals, you're healthcare professionals. And I know you all get frustrated because the stuff that we're talking about, you probably know really well. And we can talk till we're blue in the face, right? But it's conveying this information to the providers. And Sanal, before we end our podcast, I want you to kind of give our listeners some takeaways, some things that they can do, like maybe a gap analysis or performing internal audits and the frequency to which they should be doing those. But here's what I want to leave our listeners with, this last statistic. In 2020, we were plagued by a public health emergency, but yet the Department of Justice obtained more than $2.2 billion dollars in settlements and judgments from civil cases. Okay, these are not the criminal cases, these are the civil cases involving fraud and false claims against the government. And this was for the fiscal year ending September 30th of 2020. Of the more than 2.2 billion in settlements and judgments that were actually recovered by the Department of Justice, 1.8 billion dollars related to matters that involved the healthcare industry, including drug and medical device manufacturers. Sanal, just what we were talking about in the beginning of this podcast: managed care providers, hospitals, pharmacies, hospice organizations, laboratories, and physicians. And the amounts included in this 1.8 billion reflect only federal losses.
Mm.
And in many of the cases, the department was instrumental in recovering additional tens of millions of dollars for the state Medicaid program. So, folks, take this stuff seriously. And I think the thing to also keep in mind is that it's not just the provider who gets targeted during these investigations. It's practice managers, it's the coders, it's the compliance professionals, it could even be the consultants.
Mhm.
So, Sonal, in the last few minutes that you and I have together, because I know I've taken up a lot of your precious time, and I'm so grateful and humble that you've been willing to stick around and talk with this guy. And by the way, um, I put on a brand new hat for you
Oh,
today.
thank you. I love it.
I have never worn this hat with
You're
anybody else.
breaking it
So
in. Oh, I
this
love it.
this is the Sonal hat. So
Thank you. Thank you. No, I love being here. This is a wonderful opportunity. You do amazing things.
thank you.
So I love it. I love it. But in closing, I really want your audience to um, be able to, tell their providers, let's get proactive. This is my big mission for 2021. I say this everywhere. Let's be proactive. Let's start understanding our own data, right? Don't be afraid of it. I want providers and practices to be able to conduct their own internal audits quarterly when they have a new service line, when there's a new overhaul in coding, which we just had in January 2021, right? We should be mindful. We have a new doctor on the team. Dr. Jones just joined. We should be auditing him. There are lots of ways that we should be critically analyzing the types of services that we're trying to send out, try and make sure that we're documenting in accordance to support those CPT codes, those HCPCS codes, that all of that DME, whatever it is that you're doing. I really want providers and practices to not be afraid, because this is the aftermath. I'm very experienced on the post-payment and on the back end of things, and it's a disaster. I don't like the landscape that we're in. I just don't like it. So I really would love to see everybody just embrace compliance, and include your budgets, please, to include monies for compliance. It's integral and vital to your practices to stay open, and just do more to continue the amazing patient care that you all provide. So I want the practices to survive and thrive.
Yeah, and you raised a great point in one of the things that you just said, and I think I don't want it to go over the heads of anybody who's listening or past their heads or whatever the proper way to say it is. Us down here in Georgia, we have our own language sometimes that we use. But I get a lot of providers say to me, Sean, you want me to spend money on education? You want me to spend money on preventative audits and all of this stuff? I mean, do you understand what we just came through? Do you understand what we're dealing with? Do you understand the costs that are involved in running my medical practice? When revenues are down, when times are hard, that's the time you invest in
Right.
your staff. That's
Yes.
the time you invest in the compliance to ensure that things aren't slipping through the cracks, that if there's been releases of new information or changes in guidance specifically in your specialty, you got to stay on top of these things.
Mhm. I agree
So
completely.
all right.
It's a complicated business, healthcare, but to remain standing and strong in the future, we have to embrace compliance.
Absolutely well said. All right. Well, Sonal Patel, this brings us to the end of our podcast today. I cannot express my sincere appreciation and gratitude enough to you for taking time out of your day, coming on the show, sharing your knowledge of the Unified Program and Integrity Contractor Program, talking about the proactive things that providers and their staff need to be doing in anticipation of receiving not only a UPIC letter, but any letter from any investigatory agency or SIU for a commercial insurance company. And obviously, it was really great to learn about your past and how you migrated into the healthcare industry. And I can't tell you enough how great the work that you do is, and how appreciated you are. I follow the comments on LinkedIn all the time. I follow the comments that posts, that folks are, making about your different posts. And I think you have a lot to be proud of. And I think if there's anybody who listened to the podcast today who did not know who you are, I think they learned very quickly that you're a competent healthcare professional and that you're somebody who they should be following on a regular basis to get good information. So, again, I want to thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much, Sean. I totally appreciate it. It was wonderful to be here.
All right. So, thank you to all of our listeners. I hope that you've enjoyed our podcast today. My name is Sean Weiss, and I promise I will try to do better next time for you. Please tune in to our next podcast that's coming up in just a week from today.